time?
Yeah. All right. All right. Go ahead and talk. Thank you all so much for today to talk about feedback. I wanted to talk a little bit about feedback today because we've all been reflecting on the rapid rate at which our work changes these days. How we work, where we work, the way we work together, how much we're trying to get done is changing rapidly. Are we reflecting on the human component of giving and receiving feedback, which is at the core component of making that work successful? Are we doing our best to adjust our feedback practices for ourselves and our organizations to make sure we're setting ourselves, our people, our organizations up for maximum success? Feedback is relevant regardless of your role, your title, doesn't matter. The goal of today's session and conversation with these amazing folks is each person in this room is inspired and empowered and a bit more informed to go back to your organization and give the feedback, receive the feedback that you need, empower your colleagues around you to do the same, your teams that you're leading, your leaders who you look up to. We really want to help foster healthy cultures of feedback. So without further ado, I am Sarah Holland. I am a people manager here at Lattice. I oversee our product adoption consulting department. And I am joined by three very fantastic women up here. They are experts and live and breathe feedback. So Mel, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and just for fun, tell us your current role and then tell us what was your first job ever?
Okay. I'm Mel Steinbach. I am the Chief People Officer of Masterclass. Masterclass is an online learning platform both for consumers and for businesses. And we were really born out of the idea that everyone deserves to learn from the best. The best education is entertaining. And then as it relates to our B2B business, we really want to make our learning as relevant as possible to where you are and how much time you have to devote to learning. So that's what I'm doing today. But my first job that I got paid for was I was a camp counselor. Which, yeah, you might say I'm still a camp counselor. I don't know. But yes, camp counselor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sana. I lead our HR business partner team at Brightfield, which is an early childhood education SaaS platform. Oh, and my sound is now on, it sounds like. So some parents love us because that's how they get updates about their preschoolers and kids who are in daycare day to day. My first job, so I was supposed to be a doctor like from day one, and my job was to get good grades in school. So my first real job was actually when I graduated college, and I worked at an industrial supply company. And I was actually like those supervisors that are supporting folks who are taking live calls from customers. So I was like the supervisor when things got escalated. And one funny fact is every time they would say, "Hey, you can talk to my supervisor, Sana," they would always call me Donna. So at some point, I've just become Donna. So.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Farrah Mitra. I am a ex-Bain strategy consultant turned HR tech executive in very hyper-growth, ever-changing environments. I am now the founder of Green Read. I am an executive coach. I am a communications coach, and I'm one of 12 Radical Candor coaches globally. So I get to teach feedback workshops and keynotes, which I'm really, really proud of. And then I do people and cultural advisory services. And my first job was similar to camp counselor. I was an after-school care counselor, and Joe Montana's kids were in my program. So fun fact, I don't watch football, but I know it's a big deal. So.
All right. Thank you so much. We're so lucky to have you three here. Thanks. So I want to get us started off from a higher level. So let's talk about the role feedback plays in a culture. What does it even mean to have a healthy culture, and why does it matter? Farrah, could you kick us off and tell us what a healthy feedback culture looks like?
Yeah, for me, a healthy feedback culture is where feedback is normal. It is not something that is stress-inducing. It is not anxiety-producing. Like, It's just a part of your day. It feels like a gift and it's safe. So when I was at my first tech company, we were working very long hours. Things were changing all the time. And my boss and I were in the trenches. And the one thing I remember is that he just trusted I could do the work. But where we spent all of our time, like every one-on-one was feedback. Like, how can I grow as a leader? How do we weather change? What are the changes we should make? And it was the best learning experience of my life because of the amount of feedback that I got. And it truly felt like a gift. So if he came into me and just said, hey, Farrah, I really don't think that idea is going to work. I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. You just saved me 3 hours tonight versus feeling bad. Like I knew he always had my back and I always knew that he was in service of me and I was in service of him. And so it felt safe. It felt like a gift. We were unfiltered and we said the things we needed to say to each other. So
Sounds really continuous. Mel, why don't you tell us a little more? What does healthy feedback look like?
Yeah, I think a culture of healthy feedback to me is one where feedback is expected. So like feedback as a surprise is only really good in one scenario, right? Like when it is like really exceptionally good and like surprise, you're getting a giant raise or something like that. But I would say feedback that is expected to me is really that really signifies that it is a culture of feedback where everyone expects that they are going to get it, to Farrah's point, regularly. And then the other point for me on what makes a culture of healthy feedback is that the feedback is given in the spirit of growth. So I have received feedback in my career that felt very punitive and really like irrelevant to growth or the task at hand. And so I think the healthiest feedback culture is expected and in the spirit of growth.
Span multiple directions.
Yes, and it is not reserved for just like one lane. It is a multi-lane highway on that feedback, right? It's going up, down, across, like cross-functionally. And again, like if it's expected, then that doesn't feel like, you know, you're stepping on toes or you're out of your sandbox. I think it can really help that way.
Absolutely. Sana, what do you want to add?
Yeah, so I agree with what my panelists have shared so far. I think Sarah this morning talked about naming the elephant in the room. So just to get it out there, how many of you are people managers, and how many of you are individual contributors? We have a good mix here. I think one of the things that came up for me as we were discussing this topic is like I think the bar for giving feedback has gotten higher, and it feels more expensive. It feels more challenging. I think in the past couple of years with COVID, with many companies going fully remote, you just have like less signal on people. It feels more expensive to like, do I Slack this? Do I pull someone into a Zoom? And I think we have greater concerns about people's well-being. How is someone going to take this? Is this going to ruin their day? They're working really hard, or they have something going on in their personal life. And so I feel like as an HRBP, I'm getting just tapped a lot more by managers at all levels saying, hey, I want to give this piece of feedback, but I like want to make sure it's right. Am I saying all the right things? I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I think that things have just gotten more challenging and more scary for feedback. And so one of the things like for a healthy feedback culture in one of my perspectives, we focus a lot on the giver. One of the asks I'd ask for you as a receiver is like, how easy are you making it for people to give you feedback? And are you someone that someone will feel comfortable pulling you aside quickly and sharing something versus are they going to have to like script it, ask ChatGPT what ChatGPT would say, right? Are they going to have to practice it with their HR business partner? Or are you someone where you are going to be very approachable, very open and eager to hear what they have to say?
Yeah, and Sana, just to add to the COVID perspective, like I felt like with all my clients, like how could I give someone feedback right now? Like everybody's worried and all these things are going on. I was like, actually, like if I'm really worried and everything's going on and every minute of my day is kind of precious right now, I actually want to know the thing I could do differently, right? Like if I'm going to spend the time in a really challenging environment, like I'd rather know to do the thing better than to not know at all. So it is hard and it is more expensive, but actually in some of those moments, you kind of want to know what you could do differently.
I hook onto this expensive point because I think it's a really interesting one. I mean, particularly when we're talking about, the last session was talking about partnering with the business and like really driving value. And I think about, the cost of not giving feedback, like how expensive it is to not give the feedback and have the person like not meet the objectives, or like then you have to term them and you haven't like given them good feedback, and so then there's this like giant severance package or whatever it is. Like there's actually it is expensive, and it's really expensive not to give it to.
All right. So what do we think, what are some things that we might be doing that we think are in the best interest of fostering a healthy culture of feedback? Like what are the practices we might be experiencing ourselves or putting out there on a regular basis that are actually counterproductive and costing us when it comes to establishing a healthy culture? Mel, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, well, my hot take is that I think the sandwich approach of feedback giving is for the birds. I think it's terrible. I hate it when people give it to me. I try very, very hard not to use it because to me, it cheapens both sides, you know? So if you're like, if you have something really good to share with one of your team members, give it to them. Like, don't then like feel like you gotta throw in some bad thing just to like, because you're committed to the sandwich approach. Or if you have some critical feedback, like just lay it on there, because they're just waiting. They're not really even hearing the good part because they're just like super focused on what you're gonna tell them that's critical. And then they're not gonna hear the good part at the end either, right? So my piece of advice is sandwich approach. That's the one thing that we've been like preaching as an industry. I would say let's leave that one behind.
And
Also not
Mel,
very
I
efficient.
feel like the sandwich approach, I'll speak from my own perspective, or you said Oreo yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Like however you want to call it. I feel like it's selfish. Like it's selfish for the giver because you're like, I'm gonna say this good thing, and then there's this bad thing, and then it's all good. Don't worry, everything's fine, right? And then the person is completely confused. So I guess from my perspective, it feels selfish because you're just trying to make sure the person's okay and they don't have reactions and we're all good here. But they're completely confused, and then the message never gets to them.
Yeah.
So plus one.
Sana, how about you?
Yeah, it kind of latches onto my earlier topic. Like, I do think right now with the environment we're in, people feel like they have to have it perfectly buttoned up, perfectly scripted, and then it also has to be paired with like a performance message. Like, I think we've just made it too hard, right? And I think like a lot of times the best feedback I've gotten in my career was like when the manager just like my manager right after like the presentation or the check-in was like, "Hey, I'm going to give you something really off the cuff. That didn't land well. Here's like my really raw observations on why." And then they came to me with a lot of questions and curiosity versus feeling like they had to give me like a full diagnosis of like why I didn't do the right thing and what I can do better next time. And so it created like the space where we just kind of in a coaching conversation versus like them coming to me with like a script, the takeaways and action items, and also here's your performance assessment as a result of this. Like, I think, how can we create more spaces where we're just giving the off the cuff the feedback and not feeling burdened to have the A to Z like diagnosis on why this happened, right? Or what we can do differently, asking the person who's receiving the feedback to go on the journey with you and for them to self-reflect and like get to the right answers, right? A lot of times like we are our own toughest critics, and all you really need someone is to ask you the question for you to get to the right feedback yourself. And so how do you unlock more of those conversations?
Yeah, Sana, my boss we would come out of a meeting and he said, "How do you think the meeting went?" I'm like, "Well, I rambled. Like there were two places I could be more concise. Here they were. Here's what I'm going to do next time," and just call it out. And he's like, "Okay, good. Like great, we're good here, right?" Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it's just a question to check in with somebody.
Right.
Farrah, we've talked, I've really enjoyed our conversations where we both try to be really highly efficient. And one of the ways that we might unintentionally be counterproductive is we try to overload feedback sometimes and cram everything in. Can you talk a little bit more about like why that's counterproductive to a healthy feedback culture?
So I do love to be efficient and I do love to be productive. And I always thought that a feedback conversation was like, hey, you got to say it, land it, talk about it, internalize it, next steps, boom, like get on to the next subject, right? And again, that comes from being like efficient and productive and analytical and all the things. And the CEO of Radical Candor helped me understand, like when you do that, skipping that processing part and skipping that moment to internalize it actually doesn't let you understand the feedback. Like when you skip that and you go really quickly, and so sometimes the conversation is just going to be giving the feedback, and maybe the person cries, maybe they get upset, maybe it's really hard, because if we give a tough piece of feedback and you want people to be their authentic self, they're probably going to have a tough reaction. That is totally normal, right? And so sometimes it might just be helping them in that moment, and what we call in Radical Candor, caring personally for them in that moment, and trying your best to help. So I would be really nice because I want people to be okay. So I see tears and I run away. I deliver the feedback and then I say, it's okay, don't worry, you didn't know, we're moving on. But that's really nice. I think we need to be kind. Kind is, I know this is hard for you. Kind is making space for people. Kind is letting someone go away overnight if that's what they need before you pick the conversation back up. And so for me, what I've just learned is this could take multiple revs. We don't need to jam it in. When you are truly in service with someone, first they need to process it and feel it. And I've cried in some of the toughest feedback moments. I needed to feel it to understand it. Like I really genuinely needed to know the impact I had to be able to move on. So
I love that you're efficient and productive, and it has been like working with you on this panel has been amazing to see all of that you were able to accomplish in all of these hours. But I do think that like my experience with feedback is it's the thing that we should optimize for when we're giving feedback is actually not efficiency.
Right,
It's
exactly.
effectiveness.
Exactly.
You know, like it might take 3 or 4 conversations and that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, like to me, I think when we try and optimize for efficiency, that's when it gets
and
all,
we're wired that way. So you
Totally.
have to be intentional and know like, hey, this is my efficiency place and this is like I'm with people now and I'm trying to help someone develop and grow, and it might take time and it might take revs, but it's a muscle. So you really have to be intentional with your approach.
Sana, you are an expert at coaching others upwards, downwards on how do you disentangle feedback, whether it's like coaching informal feedback from the formal feedback. How do you coach managers and individual contributors alike?
Yeah, so I think as someone who coaches managers, like the big pattern I observe with a lot of leaders is like, you know, you're working on something, you're working maybe on a project in a quarter, you have like 2 or 3 examples of something that didn't feel like it hit the mark, but you're busy and you're like, they'll figure it out. And you get to the end of the quarter and now the CEO has noticed that this project's off track. You have multiple cross-functional stakeholders coming up to you and saying, what's going on with this initiative? It feels like a train wreck. But you are now at the end of the quarter and now multiple stakeholders are aware that this person's likely not meeting the mark. And now you're in a much more challenging performance conversation because you skipped over those early moments where you could have given the coaching and the feedback in a much lower stakes environment, right? So my number one take home for managers is stop skipping that step. That's really important. Getting that early indication of how things are going and providing that feedback. And that's where you don't have to tie it to a performance message. It is 100%, I'm just gonna coach you to get better on this project and this initiative. Here's how you can upskill how you present. When you get to the end of the quarter and the project's off track, you might be in a place where wherever your performance management cadence is, where you have to do a quarterly check-in, right, in Lattice. And you have to mark this person off track because the project didn't meet the mark. And that is now, we've shifted from a place where we're not in a coaching, safe space to like, this actually is going to impact your performance. This might impact your compensation. This might impact your performance rating. So the main thing is, how do you decouple, like really lean in on those early feedback opportunities so that when you get to the performance conversation that is maybe more serious, more impactful to where this person's going to be moving in terms of promotion, their compensation, there aren't any surprises, right? They know they've been given all those early indicators of how they're doing.
Yeah. So let's talk how we build a foundation that's strong enough to enable that, empower that continuous cycle where it is just a natural pattern and behavior among people. Mel, what's one requirement that needs to exist in order to start laying that foundation for a continuous feedback culture?
So I've had the opportunity to put in review and reboot 4 different performance management approaches in my career. And the only ones that succeed, the only ones where like feedback is actually, it does become part of the culture, is when the CEO champions it. And if the CEO is not bought in, best of luck to you. Like, it is just not gonna fly. And it's not just that they have to be bought in like a private one-on-one with you, but like they have to be bought in like in showing up in, talking about it in public places, whether that's on all hands or whether that is, in larger group meetings, whatever those, leadership team meetings are, but they have to be visibly out front and supporting that culture, I think, or else it will fall flat.
Yeah, and they set the tone, right? I was telling you earlier, like I had a CEO, worked at a company, and the CEO was 15 minutes late to every meeting, and then everyone was 15 minutes late to every meeting. Like it just sets, that person sets the tone. You have to have leadership on board.
Yeah, and by the way, like the quality of the feedback that the CEO gives is also really important, right? So if the CEO isn't really good at direct feedback or clear feedback, well, then nobody's going to really feel like they have to get good at it. And so there's a lot of goodness for all of us if we can get our CEOs to be excellent feedback givers.
So Farrah, you're kind of, this is your wheelhouse. You're coaching executives all the time.
Yeah.
So how do we actually get to this point where, senior leaders like CEOs are soliciting and open to feedback?
Yeah. I think the number one thing people need to do is ask for feedback, right? So asking for feedback, you're 100% going to learn, you're going to grow, you're going to develop. Yes, that is a given. And your ability to ask for feedback, your ability to take it, to want it, to take it without defense is really going to give you the right to give it, right? So in Radical Candor, we say your right to get it gives you the right to dish it. And it's so important to be able to go out and role model that in the organization because I'm sure you all know it's really hard to go out and give feedback. So when someone invites it in and then makes it safe, it's really, really helpful. And one of my favorite tips and tricks that I've learned in Radical Candor, and I'm going to be a broken record because I love Radical Candor and its
I love
teachings,
Radical Candor too,
yes,
by the way.
is what we call a go-to question. So in my old world, I genuinely wanted feedback. I'd go to people with a smile and warmth and say, hey, do you have feedback for me? What feedback do you have for me? And I got absolutely nothing because on the spot in the entire universe of anything I could have ever done, like, please tell me something. That is not an easy ask, and it's just too hard. So a go-to question is where you ask something open-ended and specific. So what's one thing I did last week that made it really hard to work with me? What's one thing I can do next week to make your life easier? What's one thing I could do to be a better leader to this team? That is something that, one, it's not a yes-no question, so you kind of have to answer it. Two, I think it's specific and honed in. And then three, you're taking the burden off the person. It is so hard to get up the guts to say, hey, there's this thing you're doing, and then here's the thing, versus I know I do things well. I know I do things not so well. Please tell me, like I am inviting this feedback. So I love the idea of role modeling by asking for it first, showing that it's safe, and then being able to create that culture by giving it also.
Sana, what would you like to add?
Yeah, just 1+1 on that is one thing I've practiced doing is after a big rollout or process or whatever project, I will write my own feedback and send it to my boss.
Oh, cool.
Do my own mini retro.
Cool.
And she's told me multiple times, oh, that makes it so much easier because then I can just give it to you in response versus having to find a way to open up the door and say, hey, let's give the feedback. So just pro tip, write your own retro and send it to your boss. I think the most magical feedback culture I've ever experienced in my career was a couple of roles ago where our CEO every 6 weeks required bi-directional feedback. So every 6 weeks you had to show up to a one-on-one with manager, direct report, and you each gave each other one glow, we used to call it a glow, and one grow. And so I remember my first one-on-one with the CEO, I was like, I'm not giving the CEO a grow. I'm just going to give him glows. And after that conversation, he slacked me and said, hey, Sana, that feedback wasn't great. You just basically gave me some generic.
He gave you feedback on your feedback?
Yes. He said your feedback was very general. It was nothing constructive. And so it that whole cadence, and it was a company cadence. Everyone every 6 weeks had a recurring bi-directional feedback. I think it just reduced the barriers because we're all in it together. Everyone's getting the feedback and receiving it. And I think for me, when I asked him, how did you get to this place? Because no one, that takes a lot of courage in my mind to say every 6 weeks, I want you to come give me feedback live. And the thing that's really stuck with me is a lot of the sting we feel around feedback is rooted in ego. And ego is a word that none of us necessarily want to say that we have, but all of us have it, right? We have a sense of pride in our work. We care about what we do. Melanie talked about yesterday, it's personal. We put a lot into our work. But a lot of his journey as a leader was like, how do I diminish my ego as much as possible and just like take everything anyone has to give to me to make myself better. And I thought that just like totally changed the way I thought about feedback.
All of these requirements that we're talking about are rooted in trust, right? Establishing trust. At the end of the day, we're all humans, and humans are complicated, and psychology is at the root of all of that. I'd love to go a little deeper on this aspect of needing psychological safety to exist first. How does that play a role along with being aware of biases? How do these things play a role in becoming more effective in our feedback practices? Sana, do you want to chime in first?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, coming from like a background as a DEI practitioner, like super important to be aware that like we all have blind spots. Like we are in probably the most diverse workplaces we have ever been in, in history. And we're in a lot of situations fully remote. We're potentially even global. How many of you have global colleagues, right? All over, across the world. It's more complicated, right? It's not just like I'm sitting next to you all day and I know you, and so I just lean over and give you the feedback. So I think it's first important to just be aware, like we're in a different place, different time. And whenever I think about bias, we all have them. All of us have these like little shortcuts that our brain has created for us to make things easier for us. So I look in such and such as profile picture, their name, and I make a few assumptions about who they are automatically. It's human. We all do it.
If you have a brain, you have bias. That's
yes.
like one of my favorite quotes.
It is, right? And so with that in mind, like when you're thinking about the feedback you're about to give this person, the main call out I make is about behavioral feedback. So when we're making, comments about someone's personality, their communication style, how they speak, that's when you really want to pause and like dig in, right? Like what is the behavior I'm observing? What's the impact of that behavior? And what's the tie to the business? If I can't be super crisp about that and I'm just going to go up to so-and-so and say, hey, your communication style isn't great, that conversation is going to go sideways, right? So I think first and foremost, really unpacking what is the behavior, what is the thing you're trying to give the person coaching on, and what's the impact of that behavior that you would like to see them move out of. The main call out that I will leave you with, though, is like all this sounds scary, right? It can make you feel like, oh, I shouldn't give the feedback. There's a lot of research out there that folks from underrepresented backgrounds don't get as much feedback and they get worse feedback. So the worst thing you can do is not give the feedback, right? Especially someone coming from an underrepresented group. Give the feedback, ask for help, approach with a lot of curiosity and kindness, right? You might not get it perfect, but it's way better to do it. Don't let perfection be the enemy of doing something.
Yeah. This helps us also disentangle like ourselves as humans from the work product or the feedback, right? And that's so critical in establishing psychological safety. Mel or Farrah, did you want to add anything on bias and what are we missing?
So much.
I know, so much.
So what Sana said about give the feedback is so critically important. So we call that, hacking HR call that protective hesitation, is like you're so hesitant and you're so worried about the other person that you don't give the feedback. And then it's not protective. It is actually very harmful, right, to people's development. And just to add more, just adding some facts to what Sana said was HBR talks about, they have a study that shows that men receive more specific and clear feedback, both praise and criticism, and only 12% of women feel that the quality of the feedback that they get is high and clear, which is just wild, right? And if you don't know what to improve on, how are you going to grow and how are you going to develop and then how are you going to progress? So just a million plus ones to what Sana said. And then there are ways that you can think about countering that, right? So one is, if you're going to write a review, make sure that you write out the assessment criteria by which you are going to review that person. You have to have that with you so that you are tying your feedback to that, right? Second, you can give yourself a rule, like I'm going to talk about 3 business outcomes with every single employee in this development conversation and the impact and the feedback. This one's a little bit of a forcing function, but I liked it, which is make sure you write the same length review for every employee, right? It has to be high quality, but at least there's this forcing function to make sure that, when they're the same lengths, you're probably going to get to the same level of specificity. So lots of ways to counter it, but just so critically important.
Lots of nods here. Either we've all written too long reviews or we've received reviews that are either too long or too short. So thank you for addressing that so much. Mel, did you want to add anything?
Well, I actually kind of want to go back to a previous question. If that's allowed. Can I go backwards?
Always.
Which is, it was around this discussion of like framing out of the feedback and asking your go-to question. And I've been just reflecting as we've been here. And first of all, a lot of my team is in this room. And so they will all be getting a very specific question from me afterwards about how the presentation went. So I'm giving them all a heads up right now that is coming. But, one of the things I will say, I was terrible at receiving feedback early in my career. I did not like it one little bit, which was so interesting because I really believed in continuous improvement. But I think, Sana, your point was like my ego was too, I don't know, type A and whatever. And so I had to figure out a way to reframe it for myself so that I could get it and make it easier for people to give it to me. And also, I did really want it. I just didn't like hearing it. Also, it's so weird. I know, it's crazy, right?
It is.
So my go-to question is, what improvements do you have for me? Because I love continuous improvement. I did not like feedback, so I just called them improvements. And then all of a sudden, they were so much better to receive. And so, that's my, going back to this, how do you have a go-to question? How do you be a better receiver of feedback? For me, a lot of it was in that reframe for myself. And then it actually even makes it easier to give it. So, my team might be getting a question. What improvements do you have for me on how I could have done a better job communicating my thoughts on feedback after this presentation? But, it's like, it's improvement. So you're helping, and it makes the giver of the feedback feel better because they don't feel they're like criticizing. They are improving, which it's like all the psychology behind all of
Let's
that.
chat receiving.
Can I?
Yeah.
Can I?
Go,
jump in?
go,
Okay,
go.
I am ready.
I know you're jumping.
Sarah knows how much I care about this topic. So just some hot tips. So one, I love how you changed it to improvements, and that felt better, and it was like more inviting. And to Sana's point about ego, like if you're going to go out and solicit feedback and you're going to ask for feedback, like please just pick the thing that feels safest to you, right? If you're going to pick a question that is so big and you're not ready to hear that answer, you're probably going to get defensive or it's going to be really challenging. And the minute you shut the feedback down, it's really hard to get it again. So please just pick something that's like bite-sized and manageable that feels good for both sides. And then two, I get asked this a lot, which is what do you do if you don't agree with the feedback? So if you don't agree with the feedback, a couple of things that can be helpful. One is like go away and think about it overnight, right? Like the last thing you want to do is just be like, I disagree, boom, we're done, right? Again, shutting someone down. If you don't agree and you know that that person has put a lot of thought into it, like it's probably worth going away and being thoughtful about it overnight. Two is look for the 5% overlap. There's probably something you can agree with in there. So see if there is some shared ground that you can take in that feedback, right? Even if it's just 5%, look for that. And then this one was really counterintuitive to me. And this one, the CEO of Radical Candor talked to me about, which was, I always felt like examples are automatically good. They give detail, they help you understand something better, which is a like clear yes. And if you ask for examples on the spot, it could actually feel like you want them to prove it to you. Like it's not your intention, but it could actually backfire a little bit. So it's not to say don't ask for examples. It's just to say like, just be thoughtful about how you ask for them. Give people space, give people time. Like, do you have any? I'd love to take them anytime, but just like tread lightly on those. And again, they are good. You just want to make sure that you don't have any unintended consequences when receiving feedback. So sorry, I talked a lot because I care so much
No, it's
about.
wonderful.
I care so much about receiving.
Feedback is all to help us unlock potential, right, at the individual level or the organizational level. So, and that keeps coming back to trust, our critical requirement for fostering this healthy culture of feedback. So we're starting to get into the last portions of feedback. We've talked about the importance of how does feedback contribute to a healthy work culture? how do we build a foundation? What are some things to be aware of? Can we talk a bit about our, as we start to wrap up, our favorite takeaways? And like, what are some of the gift nuggets that we want everyone in this room, our friends, our virtual friends, to walk away with today? Mel?
You want me to start?
Do you want to start?
Okay. So the biggest piece of advice that I tell people around giving feedback is get over. It's not meeting the mark, or that they're working hard but in the slightly wrong direction. That is difficult. And if you withhold that feedback because of your discomfort, because it doesn't feel comfy to give that, then you are robbing them of the opportunity to improve. And that is unacceptable. Like, to me, that is just like, I tell people, if they don't know, they can't grow, right? And so, like, how do you get over your own discomfort? It's like, it's 30 minutes, and then it's out there, and then you can talk it through with them. And now they know that it's maybe an issue, and maybe they disagree with it. I gave some feedback a couple weeks ago. The person was like, Mel, I hear you, and I disagree with you, and let me tell you why. We discussed it, and I was like, I think you're right. Okay, I recall that feedback. Like, that is no longer like the end. But if I would have not given it to them, we would have never had that conversation. And I would have held on to it as like, oh, it's something, when it actually wasn't. And they would have never had the opportunity to like tell me what was up. So get over yourself is my one piece of feedback. Get over your discomfort.
I want that for all of us. It's such a gift to have a leader become a leader where that regular feedback loop just becomes the regular operating rhythm, whether it's upwards or downwards or sideways. That's a delightful working environment and relationship, and that actually perpetuates that sense of trust, right? The more data points we get and give to each other with feedback actually helps contribute to more of that.
Well, by the way, sometimes I even say, hey, this is hard for me to tell you because I know you've been working really hard, and this is the feedback. And like, so you don't have to like pretend that it's like the best 30 minutes of your day to give this, critical feedback. But I think like withholding it is the part. I mean, Sana talked about it. Farrah's talked about it, like withholding it from certain groups. Like, it's just not good. It is not good to withhold feedback.
Sana, what's a gift? What's a parting piece of wisdom that you'd like everyone to walk away
Here's
with?
what I generally tell people that work for me or start to like become a part of my team. I'm a like a data point in your path. Like, we're gonna work together for some time. You're gonna be at this company for some amount of time. I'm gonna give you my honest perspective from a place of care. You can take it or leave it. Like, every company, every leader is gonna have their own point of view. There's certain pieces of feedback you're gonna get in your career that might not be feedback that you want to take with you, and that's okay. I think just like trying to depersonalize it and realize that every place you go, every company you work for, every leader you work for, they're going to give you a couple of things that you're going to put in your toolkit for your next role or for your next chapter. And so try to pull out from like the where am I today? What is my career path at this company? Am I going to get promoted at the end of the year? Just take the feedback as, okay, I got another piece of information about myself and the perception of my work. I'm going to log it here, and I will reflect on it over time, right? Not every piece of feedback needs to be something you take with you. And then just one other note on receiving feedback. I think it's also really important just like be clear about your preferences. Like, everyone processes differently. If you're an in-person person, ask for it. I give it to me in writing first and then talk to me, ask for that, right? Just manage upwards with your manager. Some managers are great and will ask, some will not. Let them know, right? And if your manager is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, go to the go-to questions and start adding them to your one-on-one docs, right? Start to prompt the conversation yourself. But, in the grand scheme of things, feedback is feedback. It's a message. Take it, digest it, and then do with it what you will.
We got a question in our rehearsal yesterday about like, how do you give feedback to someone who's like, it's really hard to give it to them. Like, they don't receive it well. And we said like, oh, actually ask them how would they like it best? Like, what is the way that they receive it best, because then you're meeting them where they are, which
Right.
I think is particularly for people that have a harder time. Maybe they are like the Melanie of years ago and they think they want it, but they hate it when they get it. Ask them how it would be best for them.
Farrah,
Yeah.
how about you?
Mine just builds off of what they both said, which is feedback is so human, which means it's really messy. So good news, you're never going to be a perfect feedback giver. I think the bar is too high. You could be the most prepared person in the room and you don't know how it's going to land. You probably don't have time. And so I think what's most important is that you prepare the best you can, like definitely prepare, definitely use all the tips and tricks. And then you just wait to see how it goes with them, right? And we say in Radical Candor, feedback's not measured at your mouth, but at the other person's ear. And so you just gauge it and you see how it goes. And if they have a tough reaction, like support them in the moment and be human, right? But at the end of the day, we can't be perfect, but we can try our best. We can be human. It is messy. It is okay if it doesn't go perfectly. It can be a journey. It can be a conversation. So.
You three are a dream to discuss this with. I do want to say, well, congratulations to us. We managed our time very well. Very proud of us. Woo, love that for us. That's a piece of feedback for me often. So yay. I know. I'm so proud. Yay. But I do want to say, so before we I think we do have time for one question before we have to jump out of the room. Before I forget, I just want to say, thank you so much. You three are absolutely incredible humans, and it's really powerful to think about how many different people each person in this room and each person who's virtual works with on a daily basis. And if they walk away with 1, 2, upwards of 3 really practical adjustments they can take, this has been an incredibly impactful and reflective session. Thank you for sharing your really unique experiences. And
I learned so much.
You're the best.
Same.
Yeah.
I think we might be besties.
And we do have time for one question. Do we have a single question in the live audience? Yes, sir, Martin.
Yeah, I'm curious about finding this level of feedback. Are you aware of that might be available in the market?
So Martin, for those who can't hear virtually or in person, Martin asked, how do we maintain this human element of feedback when so many of us are now remote or hybrid and we're not face-to-face and in person? What are some tools and ways that we can maintain that clear intention and establish that trust?
Can I just clarify, were you saying specifically text-based, like typing? Yeah, so it's like you don't have video. Yeah, that's challenging. I'll let my colleagues answer that first.
Yeah. So, I mean, this came up in our brainstorm, and we saw it this morning, AI, right? Like there's a whole AI chatbot space that's evolving so fast. I get pings pretty regularly from new startups where hey, we're developing a manager coaching bot. Like you can chat with it in Slack and it'll tell you what to say or do. So, I mean, I think start exploring. I don't think this is a can of worms we're going to close anytime soon. It's here. The main thing that I think is really important is being authentic and human. I can tell when someone has chat GPT'd something. I can tell. I mean, and the technology will likely improve, right? And I often ask, why are you asking chat GPT? What is it that you want to get out from that, to improve? The chat GPT is only going to be as good as your prompts and the information you're asking it. So I think don't use it as a crutch. Use it to make whatever you're trying to get across better, but it's never, we could probably open up a whole discussion on AI, but I don't know that it's a full replacement, right? You can't just rely on it. So I think you have to have a starting scratch pad of the raw stuff that as a manager that no AI, no solution is going to know except for you. And if that input is good, the AI can make it better. But if your inputs are not good, the AI is not going to be able to help there.
And one thing on the texting is, this is a trick that it's actually from remote working, just in general for the most connected teams in remote environments are ones where they have, when they're doing their Slack or email or whatever, there's a volley back and forth, that it's not just, oh, I'm going to send you a Slack and like 3 hours later you're going to come out of a meeting and respond to it. It's happening real time. And so maybe one thing that you might consider is your first text being, hey, do you have a couple of minutes to text with me? So to make sure that it can feel a little bit more conversational, rather than I'm just going to lob over this piece of feedback that 3 hours later or in a different time zone you're going to wake up and see and be like, what even is this? So maybe time it so that you can have it more conversational via text.
Ultimately, we want them to receive the key piece of feedback that you're trying to deliver. So review it with that lens, right? I'm about to get the music and show your way out phase, but I just want to thank you all again for joining us. We've had these amazing experts. It's been such a treasure interacting with all of you, so thank you for joining. And to our virtual friends and moderators, thank you for joining as well and facilitating.